So what happened after the book came out, this Voices in Harmony?
Well, that was kind of the beginning of the last 6 years of being pretty public and having a lot of media interviews. And we do have a message that we would like to get out, and that is that we would like to have people understand our lifestyle better, show an element of respect and understanding, and eventually have it decriminalized. We feel like if it's between consenting adults and all the parties are in agreement, that we're not doing anybody any harm. And certainly with all the alternative lifestyles that are out there today, this is certainly one that ought to be considered as legitimate. Recently I read a newspaper article that said there are more alternative lifestyle people living in alternative lifestyles than there are in the nuclear family, which is a husband, a wife, and 2 or 3 kids. That means that there are more families that are maybe single parents, there may be gay couples, there may be divorced, widowed, a grandmother raising a grandchild, polygamists. All these I categorize as alternative lifestyles as compared to the nuclear family. Well, if there's more of the alternative lifestyle people now than there are the others, I think that's important for people who are making laws and dealing in social services and things like that to understand that they cannot put everybody in the same box, that they have to understand there's a lot of diversity in the people and in different families in America. So because of that, I feel like people need to understand that ours is a viable family lifestyle, that we, in most cases, assume responsibility for our families. This lifestyle is all about families, after all. It's having children and bringing up righteous children, if possible. So that's a challenge for any parent, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But so we have tried to get this message out that we should not be criminals. We should not be considered as felons, which in the state of Utah we are, if we're taken to court. But we shouldn't even really be guilty of a misdemeanor unless we're breaking some other law. Like if some families are guilty of welfare fraud or forced marriages or any kind of abuse, then naturally those issues should be addressed. And the Attorney General in the state of Utah, Mark Shurtleff, has been very good to separate the crimes from the culture. And just because somebody is living in plural marriage doesn't mean they're criminals. So we have worked with him on the Safety Net Committee, and fortunately they have consulted with us to understand our communities better and our lifestyle and beliefs, so they're better able to make the best decisions about our culture. They're able to provide the services that we are entitled to. And our motto is do nothing about us without us.
Right.
So here they were building committees, they were considering laws and all that, and we weren't even, our voice wasn't even heard. But now, thanks to Mark Shurtleff and Paul Murphy in the AG's office, they have included us in these committee meetings, and we're very glad for that, because I think it builds confidence and trust in both sides. We're able to help our own people understand, you know, there are services that you qualify for. Excuse me. And you need to know how to go about applying for those. And the government is not necessarily an enemy, as long as you're not breaking any other laws. And on the other hand, we tell the government officials, okay, we're not criminals by nature. We do not believe in abuse or forced marriages or those stereotypes that some people associate with polygamists. They're certainly not true across the board.
Let's talk about that. I would love you to characterize 2 things. One is polygamy gone wrong, which is what are the things that you would say, what you know, there are a lot of stereotypes about fundamentalist polygamists, and you know, I have a bunch of them here, that people, like you said, forced into marriages, that people live too much off the government, there are welfare issues, that there's people's wives are taken away from them and reassigned to others. You know, there are even crazy allegations of animal sacrifice and stuff like that. Tell me, and underage and incest, tell me, paint a picture for me of what polygamy gone wrong is, if you're able to. I don't want you to offend anybody, but
Okay.
what would paint a picture of polygamy gone wrong, and then counterpose that with polygamy gone right.
Gone right.
From your perspective. From your
Okay.
perspective.
Polygamy gone wrong is when there's unrighteous dominion. I think you can just narrow it down with that. Whether it's the husband of the family, whether it's a leader in a group, whatever, if he exercises unrighteous dominion over the people that are under his stewardship, then I feel like that's when these other things can enter in. If there's free agency and the desire to obey the laws, not only the laws of the land, but God's laws. I mean, child abuse is certainly not, it's breaking one of God's laws. Abuse of any kind, whether it's welfare or family members or anything like that, naturally we feel is an incorrect procedure. I think in the case of that you're talking about, those things that you mentioned, they have existed to my knowledge in one or two of the groups. There have been incidences of that, but I hope people understand there's so much diversity in our lifestyle and families that that is not the case in a lot of the families that I'm aware of. The FLDS, under the leadership of Warren Jeffs, this is once again an unrighteous dominion situation as far as I see it. There's a man that likes the power, has exercised maybe control that I feel is inappropriate, in my personal opinion, and so therefore he has taken families, split families apart, taken the man away from his wives and children. In some cases, I understand maybe the man was so dictatorial that the women asked to be taken away from him. I don't know all the details of those families down there, but it just seems to me there are some inappropriate things that have happened in that particular group, and that seems to be what the media has picked up on over the years, is those situations. That is not the general rule in most of the other groups or the independents. We have our free agency, and it's interesting, and when we did our book, we sent out a questionnaire, and one of the questions was, let's see, the point I was getting at was, how many children adult children in your family entered the principle? And you'd think that if a family was really strong in this lifestyle, that their children would stay in it as well. To me, the response came back about a third to a fourth of the adult children. Now, people might think, well, gee, that's a low number. Why weren't there more of them? To me, that says that those children being raised by public schools and all the influences in the outside world, at least they were given their free agency and they were not forced to live it if they didn't want to. Now, in the FLDS community down in Hildale, Colorado City, I'm sure the percentage is much higher, because they're not even supposed to associate with people outside their community, and they are most of the time placed in a plural family or told who they should marry by Warren Jeffs or the leader of that community. And I think this is a case of one man having a lot of authority and power over the people. And one of the reasons why Centennial Park, they split from the FLDS people, was because they wanted a council rule. They didn't want that much power invested in one man. So they formed another community or group, if you want to call it that, in about 1986, which was that's why they called themselves Centennial Park, 100 years after the 1886 revelation to John Taylor. So they wanted the council rule, and then FLDS kept with the one-man rule, and that was a real source of contention between those people. So they resolved it in that way. So I think the idea of polygamy gone wrong would stem mostly from unrighteous dominion.
And breaking the law?
Breaking laws that really should be kept, laws of God or laws of man. Now, I understand we're breaking the laws of the land by living plural marriage. That's why we want to get it changed. We'd like it to be criminalized. We'd like the Reynolds decision of 1879 to be overturned, which said that you could believe what you wanted, but you couldn't practice it, referring to plural marriage. So there's some legislation now and some cases that are coming up that we hope at least one will go before the United States Supreme Court, where that might be overturned. So there are things in the mill where we're hoping that that can be changed.
What about lowering the marriage age?
Well, no, I think just generally speaking, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think generally speaking 18 is a good age, and that is the legal age for it. We recommend to the people as we talk to them in our own lifestyle that it would be wise, if possible, to we make sure that the boys and the girls both are at least 18. So, and that's certainly what the Attorney General recommends.
How does a community deal with the dynamic if they're practicing polygamy of there being too many men? Some have said it seems to be an impractical practice because you got too many men, and
but you're looking at such a small percentage of the population in Salt Lake, in Utah, in the United States. It just isn't really a problem, because even though I think birth rate is pretty well like 50-50, 51-49, whatever, we're talking about such a small percentage of that it just hasn't been a problem. I know there are some men that would like to have more wives, but it's not typical for a man to have more than 2 or 3. That's the average. And when we sent out that questionnaire, that's what came back. The average number of wives in a plural family is around 2 or 3. You do hear of some of the leaders having more than that, or some of the men maybe having a few more than that, but that's not the general rule. So logistically, it's just not that difficult to have more wives.
Only when you're in a contained society.
That may be a problem, and that's where incest, I think, has come in, because I know in 1 or 2 of the groups they have married cousins and half-brothers or sisters or something like that, which is not something that I myself would do, but I'm not going to judge them for their decisions. I mean, you look at the beginning in Adam and Eve. I mean, they must have married brothers and sisters, and even in cousins in Old Testament times. So, and a lot of the states in the United States, it's not against the law to marry first cousins. So your definition of incest is going to vary from state to state.
Okay. So now tell us about polygamy gone right. And when,
Sure.
even when cohabitating even is involved, you gave us an example of how it can work, and maybe even a bit easier when the wives live in separate houses. Tell us about polygamy gone right. Paint a picture for us of how good it can be.
There's so many women that I know that this is just a wonderful lifestyle for them. They've freely chosen it. One experience that I think of every once in a while when I think of a plural family is this one girl that I know very well. She was raised in polygamy. Her father had a few wives. They all lived close together but in separate homes. She always knew where her dad was. She could come home from school, and if she needed her dad for something, she could go over there. She was always welcome in any of those homes. And she could sit down if he was free, just like any father, and have time with him. And the way she described it, and so backing up a little bit, so because of her happy childhood, she wanted that same happiness for her children. So she is a plural wife, very happy in it. Her kids were raised with a loving mother and a father and several mothers. And the way she termed it was that there were more people for her to love and more people that loved her. So it's really a matter of love.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Okay, there's more people for her to love.
Uh-huh.
There's more mothers and siblings, and there's more people to love her.
Okay.
So really, a plural family is about family love. Siblings, a lot of times siblings are best friends, whether they go to private school or home school or go to public school. Many times they have siblings the same age, and they're their best friends.
Does a child of one wife call the child of a sister wife brother and sister?
Oh yes, usually. Yeah,
Okay.
they don't distinguish in most cases like half brother, half sister. Now, this is my brother, and some of them might say, well, his mother is Aunt Susie or something like that. But a lot of them, they just call. Some of them call him Mama, Mom, Susie, or just Mom, or whatever. They have their own ways of identifying each other.
Sure. Okay.
In the early days of the church, I think they were called Aunt. Like Aunt Jane, and meaning a sister wife.
Okay.
But I wanted to get back to after our book came out, and we realized that it was really interesting to see how thirsty the media was for somebody on the positive side of plural marriage to explain it. They just absolutely thought this was wonderful. So because of that, a couple of us decided, it was a gentleman, decided that he would like to work with me in putting out a magazine called Mormon Focus, which we did. And that is right here. It was just one issue. the premier issue, and it came out in 2003, and it shows three sister wives on the cover, and we were hoping to have it come out like bi-monthly or quarterly, but after setting this up and getting it published, we didn't get the financial support we were hoping for, so it was just the one issue. But it really stands alone. It has articles in there, like one article is about 3 different polygamous families and how each one dealt with the challenges and the family problems and everything that came up, and the rewards as well. And they were different ages, different dynamics in the family. Another one talked about the manifesto. Another one article talked about the different diversities of the groups, called Community Focus, and it tells a little history of the different groups and independence and so forth. So that has served as a good tool, like if we go out doing a presentation up at a university, for example, in a class, we'll hand out complimentary copies because we paid for the printing expenses now. And when we do a presentation for a social services department, we're able to hand those out so that they can read for themselves a little bit more about the lifestyle. So then after the magazine came out, the 3 of us that wrote the book, plus another girl, Linda Kelch, decided that we needed to be kind of an organized entity so that when people referred to us, they would have a name by which we should be known. So we called ourselves First Principal Voices of Polygamy. And about a year or 2 ago, we decided to drop the polygamy part and just say Principal Voices, principle meaning the principle of plural marriage, or a matter of principle, a principle to live. So since then, we have worked with, like I say, the Attorney General's Office, different government agencies. We've done a lot of presentations for social services groups and college classes. We have been a resource for people who are writing articles or books or doing TV documentaries. It's just been a voice that we felt had not been heard before. So now we're glad that people are willing to listen and learn more about us. And what we eventually hope is that people will understand our lifestyle a little better and treat us with respect. After all, many of the people in the LDS Church had ancestors that lived this lifestyle. Yeah. And of all people, it ought to be understanding of that. It's people in the church that had those kind of ancestors.
Sure. What do you have a sense for how many people are living under polygamy today in the United States?
In the United, excuse me. In the United States, I've heard the figure 100,000, but that includes Christian polygamists, secular, Muslim, Jews, Mormon, priesthood Mormon, polygamists. So there's all kinds of polygamists. They don't necessarily live it or believe in it as a religious belief, but as a cultural lifestyle. Over about 3/4 of the countries in the world, it's not against the law to live polygamy. But of course it is in the United States. But so because of that, I think that it's necessary for people to understand we're not the minority, really. I mean, the people that actually practice it might be. But as far as those who stem from early Mormonism, I did a survey on that a couple of years ago and came up with a figure of about 37,000. Mm-hmm. And that included 15,000 independent fundamentalists, 8,000 to 10,000 FLDS, 7,500 All-Red Group, 1,500 Centennial Park, 1,500 Kingstons, and 1,500 that were just members of some smaller groups. So out of that 37,000, however, a lot of them are children, and a lot of them have a belief in it but aren't necessarily practicing it. So it doesn't mean that there's 37,000 actual adults living in a plural family.
Right. So do you have a sense for, you talked about sort of polygamy gone wrong and polygamy gone right. Do you have a sense for what percentage of those who are living in it are doing it right versus the more negative stereotypes?
I would certainly hope that there's well over 50% that have done it right, but I have no way of knowing that because, to begin with, there's a lot of people down in the Colorado City Hilldale community that I think probably are very happy. But I have no way of knowing that because they've been so isolated and secluded.
So as a spokeswoman, you're not able to communicate with those groups to make sure
Not
their
that one group.
needs-
And spokesperson use it very loosely
Okay.
because I am not a designated spokesperson for these groups.
Okay.
I have worked with a lot of them, and we do have a coalition committee now that has representatives from all the groups except FLDS.
So FLDS just wants nothing to do
They
with...
have been invited to participate with us, and they have chosen not to.
Okay.
So I do not know firsthand too much of what's going on down there, although I have talked to some people that have left. But the other people that I know in the other groups, they're going to have problems in a monogamous marriage. So you're going to have problems in a polygamous marriage, maybe even a few more in some cases. But most of the people that enter into this with a full knowledge of the fact that there's going to be more than one wife, and with a knowledge that it's a religious principle and that God is a part of their relationship, they know that ahead of time, and so they're willing to make sacrifices and overcome the jealousy and the problems that might arise because they're familiar with it ahead of time. So as far as polygamy gone right, I would certainly hope that in most cases it's well over 50%. But I have no way of knowing for sure.
But in your experience, the extreme negative things that are emphasized in the media aren't the norm or typical for the people that you've come to know.
No, absolutely not.
They're
Because they're focused on, a lot of them, FLDS. And, that's maybe happens down there. But as far as...
But numerically, they're less than a third.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably about a fourth.
Okay.
Third to a fourth.
And they sort of, I don't want to put you on record here, but they kind of give polygamists a bad name, maybe.
They do, because that's the only information that the media has been picking up on for years. And our voice, even though it's coming out more and more now, it's still baby steps. And the media loves to pick up on the sensational.
Sure.
The Warren Jeffs trial now coming up and all that. It just focuses on a lot of the negative that happens in the lifestyle, and certainly, a happy family, that's not newsworthy. What do you report on if it's a happy family? I think Big Love has done a lot to dispel some of the stereotypes, and I was glad when we started watching that. The only thing is the first 2 episodes were a little too intimate for our taste, but I feel like it showed the diversity in our culture, that you have, for example, a plural family that lived in an average neighborhood, a little above average. They had a swimming pool in the backyard with the 3 wives living next to each other. And then they also showed an isolated community that had a very strong leader and had maybe evidences of abuse. So you have to see the dynamics of all different kinds of variety of people that live this lifestyle.
I forgot to ask you this. Did you continue to attend the LDS church throughout your...
I did for a long time after. And then there came a point where we had a lot of company because of the books that we were writing. We had a lot of company, and the best day for them to come was on Sunday. So it seemed like my time was better spent talking about the principles of the gospel that we believed in than going and listening to classes on following the leader and what we term the milk of the gospel, which I'm not saying isn't important, but I felt like my time was better spent talking about things that I could not learn in church.
But at least for 10, 15 years, you continued?
Oh, yeah, I continued going. I wanted my kids to be raised in the church, and so I went as long as they wanted to go.
So they were raised in the church?
Oh, yeah.
Your children?
Right.
And
well, when they got to be teenagers, they themselves chose to be inactive.
all 3 of them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have a sense for how, you talk about independent polygamists, is that right?
Uh-huh.
Do you have
Well,
a sense...
independent fundamentalist Mormons.
Independent fundamentalist
We're all fundamentalist Mormons.
I'm sorry.
And no, that's okay.
I'm not-
But we consider ourselves to be independent where the others are in groups.
Okay. Do you have a sense for how prevalent independent fundamentalist Mormons are in Provo or in Salt Lake City?
Oh, by area? No. I think probably most of them are in the Salt Lake area. But I know of some in Provo and all over, because we had so many people come and visit us that were interested in Ogden's books, and in the discussions that we had, they believed in those early doctrines. So, in belief at least, they were a fundamentalist Mormon.
And do you sense that they live in arrangements much like yours and Ogden's were, that the wives live in separate houses? And
if they're independent, some of them just the same. Some of them live in separate houses, some of them might live together.
do you have a sense for how common it is for them to still attend LDS church wards?
Well, if they do, they've had to do it very quietly, without saying how they believe. So if they go to gospel doctrine class, they don't say, oh, but in section 132 it says,
Yeah.
So I imagine there are some that attend church and believe in the early doctrines, but they go along with the church for whatever reason, to whatever degree. Maybe they want their kids to go to primary and be raised in the church, so they're very careful about what they say to enable them to do that. Or maybe they can see a lot of good in the church that they want to take advantage of. But then their private beliefs might be different.
Do you have a sense that that's the exception for independence or the
Oh,
norm?
yeah. I think most people, if they're a fundamentalist Mormon at all, they are not members of the church as a whole. But I don't know them all, so I don't know for sure. But I would say that most of them get to a point where they can no longer support the teachings and the leadership of the LDS Church, and so they are eventually, either they ask for their name to be taken off, or they are discovered by something they say or did, and they're excommunicated.
What's kept this group from banding together and trying to form a church?
Well, that isn't we're told not to do that.
Who?
In 1886, when John Taylor had the revelation and told those men to keep plural marriage alive, told them that was a commandment from God, somewhere along the line they were instructed not to congregate, proselyte, collect tithing, form churches, that their commission was solely to keep plural marriage alive. That's the way I believe. Now, if you talk to some people in some of these other groups, they vary in that because they feel like there was a definite priesthood council that was formed at that time, and that they were to do the things that the church did not do correctly. But my understanding of it is that the main thing they were commissioned to do was keep plural marriage alive, not form a church.